You're listening to The Conversation, the Communication Research Center podcast from Boston University's College of Communication. I'm Dr. Charlotte Howell, Associate Professor of Film and Television Studies. In each episode, we'll be joined by distinguished faculty offering their expertise on the most pressing issues in media, communication, and culture. Thank you for joining us. I am Professor Charlotte Howell, and with me is Dr. Tammy R. Vigil, Associate Professor at the College of Communication at Boston University, and the author of Moms in Chief, The Rhetoric of Republican Motherhood and the Spouses of Presidential Nominees, 1992 to 2016. Thank you for joining us, Tammy.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And we're also joined by Dr. Michelle Amazeen, Associate Dean of Research and Associate Professor of the College of Communication at Boston University, and the Director of the Communication Research Center. Thank you for joining us, Michelle.
Glad to be here. Nice to see you.
Fantastic. So I'm going to jump right in. Today's topic is changing election norms, media, and misinformation. A lot we can talk about, but we've seen a lot of misinformation, conflicts in messaging, and a diminishing significance of former arbiters of information authority. Is this year an amplification and acceleration of older patterns of political communication, or is there something new about this cycle of presidential campaigns?
Well, I can start. I'm seeing some changes in the media system. So social media, of course, it's been around for a bit, but I think it's really becoming ascendant with a lack of guardrails, which is new. The gatekeeping that had been in place in 2020 and to some degree in 2016, it's gone, especially from Twitter, which is now X.
Yeah.
You know, that's one aspect. Anybody can post anything and it gets picked up. And then, of course, the whole legacy media system is changing. It's losing its weight, its authority, and we'll get into this, but, there's influencers that are coming to really challenge the authority of traditional media.
Yeah, and former legacy media kind of key information setters like newspapers like the Washington Post or the Los Angeles Times. There was reporting just yesterday from NPR about they might not endorse any of the candidates. And part of the reasoning, well, I think a LA Times editor resigned over it. And part of the potential reasoning is that they have other industries that they work in that they're worried about what retribution might face their medical investments, their Amazon for Jeff Bezos, if Trump gets elected. So they're not even stepping in to the space.
And we also see that the presidential candidates are no longer necessarily going to traditional media, legacy media for interviews. The Washington Post, the New York Times, NPR, and PBS have not had interviews with any of the presidential candidates or their VPs.
Yeah. I want to jump in here for just a second and say I agree with what you're saying, and I think the contemporary context, you all have laid that out quite well. If you think about it, though, from a historical perspective, we've always had this continual evolution in presidential campaigns in particular, but any kind of political campaign, where as new technologies, new communication technologies specifically evolve, the uses of them change and the campaigns themselves also change. So one of the things that we should keep in mind is that, this is a different moment. And there are a lot of changes. We've moved away from gatekeeping, but we've seen some patterns like this in the past. For example, one of the things that I think is kind of an interesting argument is the argument of FDR, right? Yes. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt used the radio the same way Trump used Twitter.
Yep.
Right? And so while it seems shocking and strange to go around, that's what he did, right? And so while we are in an important moment, and this is a great topic to think about, and we need to always think about how the media is changing what we're seeing and how the candidates are acting and who's getting to vet the information, we also need to understand, like, this is something that happens continually throughout history. Every time there's a new evolution in the technology, there's a new evolution in its use. And so, like, be aware, be critical, be understanding of it, but also give it the global perspective, right? The little more historical context.
100%.
Yes. Every version of new media has some similar patterns of growing pains, anxieties, hopes of being able to reach people that the other forms couldn't reach. But
and fears and concerns and questions about how is this going to change us? How is this going to change the system? You know, so that is a perpetual question that we should always be asking, and that we definitely should be asking now, but put it within the context of history.
Right. And there was always this fear that the new media would replace the old media. And by and large, that has not really transpired. I mean, we still have books, we still have newspapers, we still have magazines.
yeah, television did not replace film and radio.
Right.
Yeah, great.
And we see it in new forms, but like you said, we have the newspaper. It may not be in paper form all the time, but we still have that journalism, right? That journalism is now in our phones. That journalism we have in different contexts, but we still have that happening. We do need the gatekeepers, though, and I think that's the question. The question is, how do we vet the information, and how do we help people to become better able to vet it themselves?
Yes, absolutely. And that leads into another question that really arises from the continual framing of especially Trump's rhetoric as jokes, right? And that conflict of vetting, what is honest, what is joking, what do we take seriously, and who in this kind of space can help us understand that. And it runs rampant on social media. Right? So how do these new norms of communication through social media, through utilization of memes or trendy discourses, the brotification of Kamala HQ, right? And the critique of that as being unserious and therefore invalid to a certain degree. How do we negotiate these kinds of changing norms in relationship to these changing media environments and this transition in gatekeeping?
One of my thoughts is that we're witnessing a decline in institutions, like you mentioned, the gatekeeping. And it's not just journalism, it's many things. And I think there is a strategy out there. Steve Bannon said this. You flood the zone with shit. I don't know if I can say that, but that's what he said. And this is just to put so much information out there that you can't tell up from down, left from right. You have unserious information mixed in with facts. You have false information that has a grain of truth to it in order to create this chaos. So I may have strayed a little bit from what you were trying to get at.
No, it's all of a piece.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that when we're looking at this information, what happens is we can go back to like sort of basic communication theories, right? Nobody wants to experience the cognitive dissonance. And so you have somebody that you're a big fan of, say, for example, Donald Trump. Donald Trump says something totally crazy and outlandish. The easiest way for you to feel more comfortable in your own fandom, support, whatever you want to call it for him, is to discount that, right? To call it a joke, to say he's not serious. He really isn't going to be a dictator, not even just for one day, right? He can't possibly mean that. And so it makes the voter, the supporter, feel more comfortable. And so we need to be cautious and cognizant about that because, right, if you're like flooding the zone with all kinds of just ridiculousness. I mean, frankly, there's a lot of ridiculousness out there right now. And if that's the strategy, first of all, we need to be teaching people like, basic media literacy. We need to be teaching people to be able to see that. We need to be teaching people to be able to call it out. But the problem is getting people to want to call it out.
Exactly. So I say we're in an era of content confusion just because, as I was saying, you can't tell what's what. And it is easier. There are some people who don't want to know the facts. They're more comfortable with what makes them feel good or what feels right, going with their gut.
Yeah. And there's increasing places where they only encounter media that reinforces that which goes with their gut, that doesn't cause them cognitive dissonance. And the content confusion is also temporal. These social media platforms like TikTok and X have moved away from timeline curation and more algorithmic.
Exactly.
So people see things out of sequence, out of time, and there is even more confusion brought about with that.
And what do the algorithms promote? Well, things that keep you on the site longer and that they think you're going to like, or that makes you feel a certain emotion, riles you up, so that you'll engage with the material.
Yeah. Well, and I'll take you one other step in terms of the original question with the gratification and all of that. One of the things to keep in mind, too, is there's this giving somebody a pass, and then there's the critiquing them, right, and not giving them a pass. And I think that what we've seen, particularly in the 2024 cycle, is we've seen, especially since Kamala Harris became the nominee for the Democrats, is a gender bifurcation going on there, because we see that Donald Trump gets the pass because it's just a joke. Yep. But Kamala Harris says a joke and she's not serious. And she can't possibly be, she's not the right woman to be the first woman, right? Because she's not serious enough. She's not taking it seriously. She's pandering to the young people. She's appealing to them. She's pandering.
Yeah.
Right.
And more specifically to young women.
To young women, and those cat ladies, those motherless cat or childless cat ladies or whatever. And so, there's that sort of gender component that does come into the assessments of what is, boys being boys, right? Locker room talk. That's all fine. But you joke a little bit, that becomes, and you're a woman, then you're not serious. You're not presidential. And I think that's something that we really need to be aware of in terms of the labeling, the perspectives, and how we keep that conversation going, too. Even just the word gratification, right? I know that's a particular term because of a particular celebrity that...
Right, Charlie XCX.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't remember. That's because I'm old. And you're young, so good. But yes, so I understand that. But at the same time, that still evokes like Bratz dolls and, that kind of notion of a hyperfeminization and even almost a youngification, right? And so all of that becomes a different critique. Whereas Donald Trump can say, he can talk about Arnold Palmer's parts and, that's all great, everybody was so, and, but... So anyway, but there's a huge component there.
Yeah, and what you get at is what kind of information gets cycled through our media ecosystem versus like the content that Donald Trump says and the reactions to him versus the critique of Kamala HQ trying to like use the language of social media has almost more circulation, at least in, the national press discourses than what she's actually putting on.
Right.
Because, in part, Kamala cannot be joking in the same way because of her femininity and battling of sexism, but also like the particular constraints of her as a Black woman.
Yes.
So I'm curious if you, Tammy, could comment on what we were talking about at first about the changes over time in the political campaigning strategy. Is it my imagination, or is it that there is a less serious debate on policy today as opposed to in years past?
It's not your imagination. There are certainly fewer avenues for that conversation on actual policy. And I know people complain constantly. I mean, the research shows that people say that they want more substantive policy, and especially in the debates. Like when you do debate research, people complain that the debates aren't substantive enough, that the short answers are too short, that, and especially since 2016 but 2020 was ridiculous. And then even now, the lack of substance. Yet, when you give people a debate that has substance, or you give them the information that will tell them what the policies are and what the policy differences are, the research shows that they do not actually pay attention to it. Instead, what we get are conversations about the face Kamala Harris made, or the sort of like meme moments of the debates, right? We didn't get a lot. Like, I'll give you one example: the vice presidential debate. Vice presidential debate actually had some serious substance to it. Now, Vance lied.
Right.
I'm just going to say it flat out. He lied. He made stuff up. Waltz actually talked about real policies and their implications in an actual state, right, in his home state of Minnesota. He talked about how they worked. He talked about what they were. And who won that debate? If you look at the journalists, if you look at social media, it was all, look how great Vance was, because he held his own, because he was calm, because it was all about demeanor.
Civil. Mm-hmm. They were civil. They were polite.
Civil and polite.
Not civil.
And so the actual substance doesn't really get talked about. You might get some fact checking where they say, oh, this one's wrong, but you don't get the comparison. You don't get the talk about the actual policy, the initiatives, the worldview, the rhetorical vision of the future of the nation. You don't get that substantively as often as you'd like. You do get them from conventions. I will say that. If you look carefully at conventions, which I do for my research, you can see the visions there, but you have to actually bother to look. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people who are bothering to look too closely.
Is that true even with the most recent Republican convention that didn't have a very clear platform going in?
They haven't had a platform since 2012. That was the last time they actually had a real platform. But I'll give you this one, right? So in 2020, because I'm finishing a book on the 2020 COVID conventions, and the DNC put their platform, their actual written platform, out on the internet. They also put videos on YouTube of their debates, their platform debates. So you can go out there and watch them talk about where they should stand and why, right? And they had them up there before the conventions. They had them up there during. They still have them up there. How many people watch them?
35.
Not too bad. Not too far off. 5 years later, 500 people have seen those videos.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
5 years later, 500 people. And I've been like 7 of those, right? And so 7 of those views. And so people don't go. So not even the journalists, they didn't report on it. There weren't no stories about those, even though they were available.
Well, so I mean, this brings up a really good point. And you mentioned in your answer, you mentioned something about fact checking. Mm-hmm. What's the benefit? Is there a benefit to the politicians for talking about policy when, yes, they can be fact checked? It's much easier to just, make stuff up or talk about vibes and feelings and visions that are less fact checkable, but draw more attention from the media.
Well, and I think, again, here with this particular race, what you're seeing is a big gender split that answers that question. Kamala Harris was critiqued up and down for not having clear policies, and she has clear policies.
Yes.
She has stated her policies. Donald Trump has not had a clear policy in a long time.
He has concepts of a plan.
Yes, he has concepts of a plan. Yes, bravo. And so but he doesn't get criticized for those, right? And his fact checks, he says such outlandish things that his fact checks are, again, he didn't say what was right? He just made stuff up. And nobody seems to care. But then when you say, but Kamala Harris doesn't have a clear plan. And if he says Kamala Harris doesn't have a clear plan, now most of his followers think Kamala Harris doesn't have a clear plan. And she can scream it from the rooftops. She could paste it all over everywhere. And still, people are going to say she doesn't have a plan. It's kind of like this whole McDonald's thing, right? Like, he said she never worked there. Like, okay. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it just because he said that, now everybody believes she didn't work there. I'm like, okay, I worked at McDonald's. I didn't put that on my CV. Yeah. Does that mean it never happened? Like the scar here from the fryer burn didn't really happen? I'm like, come on. So it's just kind of an interesting thing that there again becomes the gender difference, right? The distinction between like what are we willing to accept from him but not from her, or from her but not from him.
So I have referred to Trump, and many people have done this. I've referred to him as a master media manipulator. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether he's so outrageous in his comments that he's solely doing that to get media attention. Like you were talking about fact-checking things. And what are we fact checking about him? That Haitians are eating pets
Yes.
in Ohio. That's what fact checkers are spending their time doing. So again, I believe there's some method to his madness.
But I think you're right. There is something specific to Trump, because even looking at like the vice presidential debate, one of the early questions to Walz was like essentially fact checking some of his claims about going to China, right? And so even his white masculinity doesn't get the same pass that Trump does, because it's so baked in that he is a liar, an exaggerator, and the thing that has been said about him since he entered politics is, take him seriously, not literally.
Yeah. Well, and the showman, right? That's kind of the thing. Being the showman means he can be showy, but he doesn't need to be substantive. And I think that's a danger, and that's a problem, because we expect our leaders to be substantive, but we don't expect it from him, and we're okay with that. We keep giving that a pass, and I think that's a problem. And it twists our rhetoric, right? It twists the political rhetoric. It changes the dialogue. It changes our ability to have real conversations about real needs, about real governance. Because what people keep forgetting when they get into the show conversation with Donald Trump is that behind all of this, there's still a job that needs to be done, right? It's leadership. He's not demonstrating leadership. He's demonstrating an ability to entertain, to beguile, but he doesn't actually lead. And that, I think, is dangerous, because it changes our criteria for what leadership really means.
Yeah, he appeals to an affective side of the populace that's not about the substance, it's about how he makes them feel. And we see that coming through in all the ways that, the people that support Trump are engaging in fannish behavior. Right? It's the projection idea of him, the virile, abbed out, with Jesus right behind him carrying the cats out of,
the every AI.
Generated.
Yeah.
But that is kind of, I do work in fan studies, and there are definitely some parallels with fan affective connection to the object of your fandom that we're seeing more and more in politics. And so shifting that perspective from substance to what is he speaking to? And that's where we also get all the anger around him, and how that anger perpetuates in these kind of spaces of media.
Sure. And we see that again historically, because I like to throw in the history there.
Love it.
You've got the fandom that kind of popped up with different presidential candidates throughout the entirety of our country's history, right? Even George Washington, right? There was fandom going on with him as the great general, right? And then, but probably a little more contemporarily, and here in Boston, we love our JFK, right? JFK was huge, Camelot, woo, right? But then the twist becomes really Reagan in 1980. You've got the first movie star, literal movie star as president, and then you've got Bill Clinton, right there, and a lot of people will actually point to Bill Clinton in the 1992 campaign. Him playing a saxophone on the Arsenio Hall, right, and with his Ray-Bans on and just playing away, and the boxers versus briefs, and you get MTV starting to really get into the let's interview the candidates, kind of thing. The get out the vote, the bus. I can't remember what the bus was called, but so they had that started to really become a lot more about the celebritization of politics. And you couple that with now social media and the idea of everybody knows everybody, and the notion of having those pseudo relationships, right? And so it's a different kind of era, but it's not necessarily at its core different kinds of human behavior.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of take it with that grain of salt.
And just a lucky blip in some ways that Obama's persona was explainer-in-chief, so celebrity and substance met in his kind of cultivation of that space.
Well, and that's one of the things that we are missing right now in terms of Donald Trump specifically. I wouldn't say it for Kamala Harris, because I wouldn't call her a celebrity candidate, but She hasn't done the same kinds of things where you're missing, where you're getting all the show and none of the go, right? All of this, the fluff and none of the, and, no substance. Because with Donald Trump, what you do is you lack that substantive component. With even Bill Clinton might.
He was a governor.
He was a governor. He might fool around on his wife. He played the saxophone. He was the big playboy kind of guy. But he also was, if I'm, and I might be wrong on this, so, you can email me if I am. No, I'm just kidding. Don't email it. But he was like one of the last presidents to actually balance the budget. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He knew what he was doing at the core. Ronald Reagan was a governor. Ronald Reagan actually, he ran the Screen Actors Guild. Right. He was the president of Screen Actors. He actually governed before. And, so it's one of those things where we had never had somebody who didn't have the experience, the knowledge, and the ability demonstrated in addition to then that celebrity.
Right. And let's remember where Trump got his celebrity on CBS, The Apprentice. Yeah. Right?
Yep. Mark Burnett, the reality TV show Juggernaut, and by all accounts, very highly edited.
Very highly edited.
Right.
Yes.
So his persona has always been very mediated, right? Even before that, he was always calling in tips to the New York Post, Page 6, which some of those.
All of that. And appearing
tabloids.
In cameos on The Nanny, on Home Alone 2. Yep. You mentioned, Bannon before.
Yes.
But of course, and speaking about the mediation of Trump's persona, there's a new movie out with Sebastian Stan as a young Donald Trump, but it pays attention to his learning at the feet of Roy Cohn. Mm-hmm. Talk about flooding everything with shit. The strategy is older than Bannon of you dictate the reality that you want to live in, and you just hammer it until the institutions fall to you. And so there's a long history there.
Absolutely. And now again, getting back to the institution of journalism, again, we're seeing the candidates are engaging much like Arsenio Hall, but some podcasters now, right? So Harris was on Howard Stern's podcast, so, a COM alumni. Also, Alex Cooper's Call Her Daddy, Charlemagne the God. And last night, Charlemagne the God was interviewed by Anderson Cooper on CNN. It's like this big loop, a feedback loop.
And Trump going on what I've heard called the Manosphere podcasts.
Yeah.
Just
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan, just leaning into the angry masculinity that he has built his persona on. And in a media ecosphere where, he's going to never get any pushback.
Exactly. And again, not going to CNN, Trump, and neither of them going to the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, PBS.
Yeah. Trump not doing the 60 Minutes interview.
Right.
Yeah, backing out of the 60 Minutes interview and coming up with the lame excuses for backing out as well. But I mean, you can criticize the candidates for that. I mean, I think that would be a very fair thing to do, to criticize the candidates.
It's an observation.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying you could criticize them. It's legit to say, well, why aren't you going to the more hard-hitting folks? I mean, Kamala Harris going to sit down with Fox News was a show of an attempt to try to sit down, to not have just friendly interviews. But realistically, most of the time you're going to find friendly interviews in these situations no matter what anyway, if you're staying on one side or the other of the political aisle in the conversations that you're having. However, it is legit to be able to criticize them for that. The other part, though, too, is to also criticize the journalists for not pushing back, for not actually asking the harder questions. I mean, when you talk about for example, again, the debates, right? When I watched the Trump-Harris debate, the thing that struck me was how easily Donald Trump walked over those moderators.
Right. David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Yeah. And how he just kept, when he wanted to speak, he spoke. And occasionally they try to push him back, But then they would end up, he ended up speaking almost, was it like 5 or 7 minutes longer overall, and then still managed to make the argument that they were biased against him.
Yeah.
And people believe it because nobody pushed back on that.
And so going into that debate also, that was on ABC, they stated that they were not going to fact check.
No, they didn't. They were not going to fact check for the vice presidential debates. That's the one they stated they were not going to fact check for.
Oh, you're
That's
right.
That's why Vance said, "I thought you weren't going to fact check me."
That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Which became the meme of the debate.
They did. ABC did.
They said they were
do
going
some fact
Yeah, they
checking.
said they
Yeah.
were going to fact check
Because you had that poll that you did that showed that, 2/3 of Americans said that they wanted debates to be fact checked?
Yeah, across party, right? Like both parties and independent voters said that they wanted it. That was the biggest answer that we got that was most consistent. And so they do want the fact checking. The problem is, how do you fact check? How do you fact check effectively within that moment? In the presidential debate, the Trump-Harris debate, you did see some attempt at fact checking, but part of the problem was there's not a venue for the forceful correction.
It's super hard.
It's super hard in that moment to say, wait, stop, that is wrong. Without the candidate then coming back and doing exactly what Donald Trump did, was like, you're not being fair. How come you didn't fact check her? Well, okay, she didn't say anything that was outrageously stupid, but, she might have said one thing that was, but anyway, she didn't have a lot of falsehoods that were that blatant. But how do you say that in the middle of this thing without it becoming a fight between the moderators? And the research shows people don't want the moderators to be terribly involved. So there's this pushback, right? The survey that we did here at the College of Communication, the Communication Research Center, showed that people say they want it. But it's, again, the same kind of problem. People say they want substantive debates. Then when you give them a substantive debate, it's boring, right? People say they want fact-checking, but don't fact-check my candidate, right? There's this kind of interesting disconnect that people have. They know what they should want, but they don't necessarily want that.
Some of that demand characteristics or pleasing the interviewer, giving the socially desirable response. Oh, no, don't fact-check anything. No, I don't want any substantive debates.
I don't really need to know anything. I just need to feel.
But I think it might also speak to kind of where we started, which is there's a lot familiar about where we are now, even as things are changing. But one of the things that we really see is that lack of guardrails. And we are in a space where people want someone to fact check, but we haven't yet figured out how to do it that now fits with these kind of new expectations of communication that are more personalized, that are more kind of speaking to different needs than a just the facts kind of mode of fact checking.
Right. Well, and, to that point, CBS, was it CBS? Oh, the vice presidential debate. They actually tried doing a QR code on the screen where if you wanted the fact check, you could actually scan the QR code and you could get the fact check. I have to say I didn't check the numbers on how many people actually did that, but I don't think it was very high. It wasn't very popular, and it was a lot of fodder for the late night talk show hosts.
All right. Well, I think we've had a really strong conversation. I feel like I've learned more through this. Are there any final thoughts from y'all?
Just thank you for bringing up this topic. We definitely are. It's so confusing out there. We're in an era of content confusion. And I think the more we talk about it, helps people understand where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And again, thank you for having this conversation. I think it's very, very useful. And I would just say to listeners, one of the big things is, it is confusing, right? There's a lot of content confusion, but there are ways to cut through that confusion. There are ways to actually cut through the chatter and the noise. And so I would encourage people to actually become more literate about the communication technologies and about politics, because one of the things is people don't like to talk politics, so they talk about the fluff around the politics, right? They talk about the easy stuff, the superficial things. And so let's do some hard work and actually get back to thinking about governing, about policy, about issues, and about how they really affect us and how our candidates should or shouldn't be behaving to lead us in directions that we want the country to go into. It's hard work, It's much harder than sending a tweet or looking at a meme or whatever. But let's try to do that, because that's the only way that we can actually really have real conversations.
Excellent point to end on. Thank you very much, Dr. Tammy Vigil, Dr. Michelle Amazeen. And this has been The Conversation. That brings us to the end of this episode of The Conversation, the Communication Research Center podcast from Boston University. This podcast was made with support from the College of Communication at Boston University and the Communication Research Center there. I want to thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more discussions on the evolving landscape of media and communication. We'll see you next time. The podcast audio is produced and edited by Abby Bonner and Eliza Lackritz, who are also instrumental in developing this podcast.